This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
Detroit is the greatest!
Straight up light you on fire for a Coney dog right now.
Darren McCarty comes back with Neiman in front of him. McCarty draws. McCarty in. McCarty scores! A magnificent goal! Darren McCarty!
Stafford takes, throws, end zone, Calvin, touchdown, Detroit Lions!
Welcome, everybody, to the latest Motor City Sports Rant. When this drops, I'll be in sunny Florida enjoying some much-needed vacation. But the show's got to go on, got to put out some great content. So I'm releasing this podcast on a Tuesday, but when you hear this, I'll be in sunny Florida. But I'm grateful to have the opportunity to talk to Steve Deace, the host of the Michigan podcast. You hear it every Tuesday on the Detroit Sports Podcast Network, or you see his great videos via the YouTube platform. I'm so thankful to have Steve Deace on the line. Greatly looking forward to the football conversation. Steve, how are you?
I'm doing well, man. There's a rumor it's spring, but I've not been able to confirm it yet. It sounds like more fake news.
Haha, you know what that means? When it's spring, that means it's time to look at professional football, the NFL draft, the Detroit Lions. But before we get into what the Lions got to do on this great April day known as the NFL draft, I just want to get your sense. You're a host here on the network. You're doing great things associated with Michigan athletics, but tell the listeners a little bit about your story and relationship with the Detroit Lions.
Well, we moved to Michigan when I was 10 years old. We moved to Grand Rapids, and we were out playing, football at the schoolyard, and I noticed all the kids were mimicking this guy, Billy Sims, I didn't know anything about, and, that was the local team, and I started watching them on Sundays, and this was 1983, and the team was doing very well, and I remember specifically a Monday night game against the Vikings that year where the Lions essentially didn't officially wrap it up, but for all intents and purposes, won the old NFC Central division. And, when you're a little kid, you move to an area for the first time, John, you're thinking, hey, if the team is good, they must be like this all the time. And so I was hooked. And, of course, that season ends with Monty Clark praying that Eddie Murray makes a kick against the 49ers, and he misses it, and the Lions lose in that playoff game against San Francisco. But at that age, I was thinking, hey, this is my first year here. That's the same year I got to be a Michigan fan, and Michigan went to the Sugar Bowl, and the Lions go to the playoffs. And I'm thinking, I'm going to grow up and just root for these teams forever, and it's going to be so much fun. Well, one of those things turned out to be true. And then there's the Lions, okay? So I had no idea the history, what I was getting myself into. I remember, I think it was the very next season, Billy Sims got hurt, never played any real football ever again. And that began my love-hate relationship where I love the Lions and I love to hate them. I've watched every game since 1983 all the way through. I go back and watch old games on YouTube. And even though I can self-loathe on Twitter with the best of them when the Lions start to be same old Lions every Sunday, people have asked me, why don't you give them up? And I'm convinced, John, if I give them up, they will finally win a Super Bowl. And I'm not going to let them get over on me like that, John. So I'm into the very freaking bitter end.
Right. And so obviously the decades of the 2000s was terrible, but if you hearken back to the 80s and 90s, John Madden even said that there was a potential, in terms of looking at the Lions in 91, he thought that they could have been the team of the 90s. And in that era, in the 90s at least, the Lions were interesting in that it kind of seemed like it was an every other year kind of situation where one year with Wayne Fontes, they'd have success, they dip the next year. And so in the 90s, I think it was definitely easier to be a fan of the Lions than it is right now.
Right. I mean, you go back to the 89-90 drafts, the Lions drafted back-to-back Heisman Trophy winners in Barry Sanders and Andre Ware. And you look at that 89 draft, man, that draft was something. Number one pick was Troy Aikman, Tony Mandarich was the number 2 pick. That obviously didn't pan out. Deion Sanders was the 3rd pick. Or no, Barry Sanders was the 3rd pick. Deion Sanders was the 4th pick. Derek Thomas was the 5th pick. That's a pretty good draft. And Andre Ware didn't pan out, but Rodney Peete and Eric Kramer ended up being better quarterbacks. You mentioned every other year. The Lions won the division twice in 91 and 93. They went to the playoffs, I think, 5 times in that era. And the reason it was like every other year, John, is because every other year they got like the 4th place schedule. And so every other year when they played the soft schedule, they'd get to the playoffs. And then the next year when they played the 1st or 2nd place schedule, they wouldn't go. They never won a playoff game after that 91 season. They won that one game against Dallas. That's still the only playoff win the Lions have since their last NFL title on December 28th, 1957. But who's counting? Me. I remember the game we played the Packers in the playoffs. Barry Sanders had -1 yards rushing. Then there was the year against the Packers in the playoffs where Brett Favre threw the heave to Sterling Sharp when we had that game won. On and on. There was the year we played the Eagles. We scored 37 points in a playoff game and still lost by 20 points. This franchise invents ways to lose in the postseason. I have come to the conclusion that the Lions primarily exist for 2 reasons: to crush the hopes of their fans at the most painful time and to clarify obscure NFL rules.
Yeah, no doubt about it, Steve. It's one of those things where people talk about curses. You've had celebrities try to come to town to break the curse. You then have, obviously, the Lions, bless their hearts, they try each and every year to put out a good product. You go back to, 99, 2000, and, they go out and they think they go out and get a general manager that can do the job, and it turns out to be one of the worst decades in the history of the entire National Football League. And so now we fast forward to, 2014, 2015, the Lions go out and they bring in Bob Quinn from the, heralded New England Patriots, and many people are on the train of, okay, the Lions are trying to build via the Patriot way, and you got Bob Quinn, who's supposed to bring the Lions continued success. And one of the early decisions when you look at Bob Quinn that maybe you can fault is his early decision to keep Jim Caldwell.
I actually thought he made the right decision at the time because I don't think Jim Caldwell is a very good game day coach. He actually does have the best record of any Lions coach since Joe Schmidt in the 60s when the Lions were really good. The problem was they were really good at the same time the Green Bay Packers were all-time good, so they were often the second-best team in their own division or conference. But what I like that Jim Caldwell did is for the first time the last few years, there was never a Sunday that I went in thinking there's no way they're going to win. The game against Cincinnati at the end of the year was not a professional outing, but there were very few of those. You had the bad start in Caldwell's second year, but most of the time the team actually had some level of professionalism. The team, you saw that in the amount of comebacks that they would have. We would see past Lions teams, if they would get down like that, it was named the Score Sunday. So I do think Jim Caldwell was not a great game day coach, and we have lots of proof to that. But I do think he did go a long way in eroding a lot of that loser mentality, that helter-skelter mentality culture with the Lions. I'm thankful to him for that. And now I think, with a veteran quarterback that the last couple of years, I think Matt Stafford has begun to put together a Hall of Fame-like resume. Now we see if Matt Patricia, now that the culture's been sort of reestablished in Detroit, now we see if Matt Patricia can make the game day decisions that in the NFL, where it's a parity-driven league, are often the difference between winning and losing.
Yeah, now it's Bob Quinn's third offseason with the Lions. Arguably, the first go-around, his draft and free agency was a lot better than his second. People are starting to be a little bit critical of who was taken last year in last year's draft. What do you make early on of Bob Quinn's early tenure with the Detroit Lions?
I said there's 2 things I like about what I've seen, and I wasn't a big fan of last year's draft either. I'm not a huge fan of what they have and haven't done in free agency this year, while knowing full well it wasn't a great class, and a lot of these free agents got way overpaid. The 2 things that Bob Quinn has going for him, though, that we've not really had in the front office in my 35 years as a Lions fan, is you can see there's a plan. The building of a team inside out. NFL franchises are built from the inside out. Almost everybody has at least a competent quarterback. I mean, we're in an era where Luke McCown is a good fantasy quarterback. We're in an era where an undrafted free agent quarterbacking the Vikings last year was almost the MVP of the NFL. So almost everybody has a competent quarterback. Doesn't mean they have a great one, but almost everybody has a competent one. Everybody's got speed and athleticism at the skill positions. Today's NFL is won in the trenches. And you win games in the NFL two ways. Can you protect your quarterback against the other team, and can you pressure the other team's quarterback? Because it's a pass-happy league. If you snip on a guy, it's a pass interference penalty. So you've got to be able to get pressure on the other team's quarterback and protect your own. You can see that he understands that. I don't know that the picks they've always made have been a good execution of that plan, but you can see that there's a plan. And therefore, I also think that there's something that the Lions haven't had in their front office most of my lifetime: competency. I'm not ready yet to say Bob Quinn is a wunderkind. I'm not ready yet to say that he's God's gift of general managers, but at the very least, we have a competent professional in the front office, and that's not something the Lions have had most of our lifetimes.
Now, obviously, we're going to get into some of the heated debates regarding the Lions. Obviously, we'll talk about the quarterback. We'll talk about the NFL draft. But do you think that when Bob Quinn went to search for an NFL head coach, that he picked the right guy for the job? Because you do get a sense that when an organization goes from primarily an offensive coach, then the next guy usually is a defensive coach. But when you start looking at some things that have happened, just his most recent game, you might go, well, Matt Patricia, there are some things he can improve upon in terms of defense. And I don't know if Lions fans are going to be ready for a bend, don't break defense, because what do we recall? We recall defenses of Terrell Austin back in 2014 that pinned their ears back and got to the quarterback, forced turnovers, kind of imposed their will. I'm not so sure with the philosophy that Matt Patricia is going to bring here that we can kind of tolerate games where the Lions give up 400 yards and can continue to be successful. I'm not so certain yet in terms of where I sit that this plan in place early on can be executed or can be well received.
Well, there's two parts to your question there. First, you look at the Patricia hire in the big picture. We all know the spotty record of Belichick assistants. Actually, Belichick assistants have done great in college football. Nick Saban, Kirk Ferentz, etc. They have a very spotty record in the NFL. But, I went back and looked at that, and none of those guys had inherited a franchise or ever coached a franchise with a quarterback even close to the level that Matt Stafford's playing at right now. Just give you one stat. Matt Stafford had a QBR over 100 outside the pocket last year. You'd think your quarterback is great if he's got a QBR of 100 inside the pocket. He had a QBR of over 100 outside the pocket last year. He is playing at an elite level right now. None of Romeo Crennel, Eric Mangini, none of these guys had a quarterback playing at that level. The closest would be Mangini when he took over the Jets, and Chad Pennington was a pretty good NFL quarterback. But most of these Patriots coaches did not inherit teams that had a ready-made, in his prime, franchise, perhaps future Hall of Fame quarterback. So I don't know that we can totally evaluate Patricia the same way that we've been evaluated previous Belichick assistants in the NFL. But I also think if you're going to make a change from a coach that was well-liked by his players and won a lot of games, then the next guy that comes in better have some serious street cred on day one, and he's got that. Patricia's got some rings. He's got jewelry. He has a reason to listen to him. I also think the beard, his parents being teachers, and yeah, he's a rocket scientist, but he has a very blue-collar mentality, and I think it's something that's easy to like and rally around in a city and in a community like Detroit. All those are things I think he has going for them. You do bring up a good point about the bend but don't break defense, but right now I don't think the Lions have the personnel to play an aggressive style of defense. There is no Ndamukong Suh that can shoot two gaps up front. You don't have another linebacker like a DeAndre Levy. They don't have that kind of personnel on defense right now individually. And so I think the personnel they have sort of requires the whole to be better than each individual part, and it's probably better to play more of a safer, more of a disciplined style of defense, especially most NFL games. Something like 87% of NFL games these days are decided by 8 points or less, one-possession games. And what Matt Patricia had to do, and he didn't have the greatest personnel on defense in New England the last few years either, all he knew he needed to do was, I've got to keep this a one-possession game so that Tom Brady can either win it at the end or close it out at the end. Now, Matt Stafford's not as great as Tom Brady, but right now he is a legitimately great quarterback. If he can construct a defense that can make it so that Matt Stafford most weeks either has a chance to close the game out or win it at the end, he can win a lot of games here because Matt Stafford, other than Matt Ryan, Matt Stafford has the best fourth quarter record of any active quarterback in the NFL right now.
I'm enjoying the great football conversation with Steve Deace. You can listen to his podcast every single week on our network. Follow him on Twitter at Michigan Podcast. Definitely support his cause by going to his Patreon page. You can get all the info on Steve and his great product, MichiganPodcast.com. And you know he'll bring some passion to Michigan athletics each and every week. That's why we have him and feature him here on our network. Now, what is the realistic expectation that I should probably have for Matt Patricia year one Detroit Lions? Because many people are saying, look, he may not get the safety net of patience because of the fact that Jim Caldwell was a winning coach, because of the fact he had the team in the playoffs, because of the fact that there was a semblance of success and a path towards, moving up in the NFL. But people will say, look, that schedule is tough. You got to have a first-year coach. You got to be patient. Advise me, Steve, what should I expect, and what is the realistic, rational way of looking at year one with Matt Patricia and this year's team?
Well, one, don't ever buy into strength of schedule ratings in the preseason in the NFL because you don't know. There's one or two injuries changes an entire season. And, I mean, if I would have told you at the beginning of the year the Lions would sweep the Packers and not make the playoffs, you'd have had me drug tested. All right, that's how capricious the NFL is. Each year for the last decade plus, on average, the league has averaged 5 new playoff teams a year. So preseason schedule ratings in the NFL really are meaningless. So we don't know how tough the Lions' schedule is. What I do think is there's 3 likely scenarios in a couple of weeks with the draft. Number one, I think it is very likely the Lions are going to trade down in round 1. Now, I don't think they'll take any deal, but when you only have 6 picks, you didn't do much in free agency. You have 4 major holes on your roster. You didn't really plug any of them. You helped a couple of them. You helped your linebacker position. You helped your running back position, but you can't really say that we are satisfied with those units heading into next season. So I think if the Lions, they're not going to take a crazy deal. Like if you call up the Lions and say, we'll give you our 3rd round pick to drop out of the 1st round. They're not going to be idiots. They're not going to do that. But I think any sane deal that gives Bob Quinn more picks, this is a very deep draft. And the beauty of this draft is the 4 of the positions it's deepest at, 3 of them are 3 of the Lions' biggest needs. Running back, running back, interior offensive line, and also defensive tackles. Those are 3 of the Lions' 4 biggest needs. And those are 3 of the 4 biggest, deepest positions in this draft. So there's plenty of ammunition there to trade down if you're Detroit. I think they will take any sane deal. I think that gives them more picks. If they don't trade down, I predict the player they're going to pick at number 20, if he's there, is Harold Landry out of Boston College, because he's what they call scheme versatile. Matt Patricia wants to have an amorphous defense. Each week it's a 4-3 or a 3-4, or they even switch it situationally. Harold Landry has that kind of versatility. He addresses one of the Lions' I mentioned defensive tackle earlier. I meant to say pass rusher. He addresses one of their biggest needs there with an edge rusher. He was highly productive in college. Last year, he lost a lot of games to injury. When he did come back, he was constantly double-teamed. Why was he constantly double-teamed? Because in 45 career games in college football, Harold Landry has 75 combined tackles for loss. That's incredible production. So I think when you look at a guy who's smart, above average athlete, tested better at the combine than people thought, very productive, comes from a Jesuit private school, straight-laced kid. That is exactly what fits into the Patriot way. And if he's on the board, I think the Lions take him if they can't get a trade down, which I think is the option they prefer. I don't think you will see the Lions make the splash trade-up pick because they're looking for depth now more so than they think they're one player away.
Now, just by listening to that, it seems like you have a vested interest in college athletics, college football, the NFL draft. How did you come to gain this level of knowledge regarding the draft and looking at how teams can put together big boards? I mean, your big board on our page, DetroitSportsPodcast.com, was really thorough, really good analysis and things like that. We just listened to your thoughts regarding the Lions' needs. How did you come to be such a savant here regarding the NFL draft? I really enjoyed that breakdown.
I appreciate it, man. Well, one, it helps that your creator gave you essentially a photographic memory. That helps. Two, it kind of helps to be a shut-in nerd loser. I'm one of those two. And I love football, man. I love football. What I love about the draft is it's the merge of my two favorite sports, college and pro football. And for me, the off season is torturous, and so what I've always loved about the draft is it's like halftime of the off season. When you get to the draft, you're halfway home. That gets you over the hump to getting to football season. We get now to the end of May, early June, and all the preseason magazines come out. You get to, late July and training camps open and conference media days and things of that nature. And then we get to August and the preseason starts and it's like, we made it through another off season, the most wonderful time of the year, football season. It's here again.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's a good time of year. A lot of people obviously call it the time of the Lions Super Bowl, the NFL draft, the time we can actually have that little bit of hope, the months from January until August before the Lions actually put on the pads. We can sit and have a little bit of hope that the Lions can actually do some things in the draft. Now, in talking about the draft lately, I think you get a sense of it too by following us on our Twitter page at Detroit Podcast. A lot of people that follow the draft are paranoid and probably heightened by the pick of Eric Ebron at 10, missing out on some potential Hall of Fame talent that went drafted behind him. And I know maybe that was a little bit unfair to Eric Ebron, but a lot of fans right now are really holding, their hands and they're gripping because of the fact that when, the Lions and the Pistons and Wings have been making these picks, especially with the Pistons as well, they've been taking guys that we feel could have been maybe taken later, not getting the proper value, and especially seeing guys taken later that actually produce. Do you have confidence that at least maybe this go around with the draft that the Lions are going to get at least some good value and not have a situation like a Kareem Hunt or an Aaron Donald or an OBJ? I think that's the biggest fear right now is the dude that we take for the Lions becomes a bust, and the pick right after becomes a Hall of Fame player.
Well, you would have, though, if you've paid attention, if you've been a Lions fan for 5 minutes, you should have all the fears you just mentioned. Now, the Eric Ebron selection was not made by this coaching staff or this front office. This front office didn't draft a guard out of Duke in the first round. All right?
Right.
Those decisions were not made by this front office. I think given the way Bob Quinn has handled this business so far and the program he comes out of, I think it's far more likely he will be too conservative, that the Lions will be a consistent 9-7, 10-6 team, and will complain that they never got over the hump. I think that's far more likely than just, cratering, than making draft picks that go over like a fart in church. That's just not been Bob's MO. It's not been his MO to swing for the fences. It's been much more of his MO to be calculating. Let's not make the quick hook on Jim Caldwell. Let's give him some time. I think that's much more his way. I think Bob approached the Lions job, John, understanding the history and culture he was inheriting, and believes the best antidote to this level of angst is consistency, is maturity. That's why whenever you hear him interviewed, whether it's in the local media or I listen to him on Sirius XM, the very dulcet, measured tone that he speaks with, and it's not the boring Bill Belichick, but he is talking to you like he's a physics professor explaining the third law of thermodynamics. I mean, I think he is exceedingly cognizant of the fact this franchise needed an adult in charge. And so I think if it doesn't work here, I think it's because he was too Hugh Beaumont. He was too father's knows best. He was too, let's make the safe play, and didn't know when it was time to put his chips all in. Like, look at the deal the Vikings made with Kirk Cousins. That is a terrible deal. And in 2 years, they're going to regret it. Because a lot of these star players on defense are all going to be free agents. They won't be able to afford them all. They're going to get gutted. But you know what? It's a deal they still had to make because it was obvious this could very well be the best roster in the NFL except for one position. The problem is it's the most important position in the NFL. So they needed to make this deal. They're going to regret it in 2 or 3 years, but if they had not made this deal, they weren't going to win a Super Bowl, even as talented as they currently are. And so the key for Quinn, and whether he is able to finally deliver the championship here, I think he will build a consistently competitive team. I think the key for him is, will he know when it's time? You know, I love watching poker on TV. Will he know when it's the degree all-in moment? Will he know when it's time to say, we're not there yet, that we give up 2 first-round picks to bring in an OBJ, but maybe in 2 or 3 years, and Matt Stafford's window in the prime of his career is closing, will he have the stones to make the deal the Vikings just made? Let's say the Lions were better. We're a 10 or 11 win team the last 2 years. Would Bob Quinn make the deal to go get Saquon Barkley? Would he make that deal? Would he make the deal? You know, everybody thought the Eagles looked foolish for the Carson Wentz deal. Now they look like freaking geniuses. All right. So that will be the test of Quinn's leadership. I don't think you're going to get terrible head-scratching picks like the guard from Duke or Eric Ebron. I think the test of his leadership and success level will ultimately be, does he have the timing and the balls to know this is when I make my all-in moment? This is when I put my chips in and I say I'm all in and we go for broke like you saw the Vikings just do with Kirk Cousins.
Oh, good. I can give you a great analogy because I'm a poker guy as well. Being a Lions fan, right now, you're sitting on 2 9s. The board, you know, and Hold'em has 9-9 on it, and it looks good. Yeah. And you shove all your chips in the middle. You feel good. You flip over the 2 9s. You're like, I got 4 of a kind. And the board comes king, king, and your opponent's got 2 kings. And you're like, well, that's the life of a Lions fan. You get it in good sometimes, and then the luck factor or whatever it is that you call ailing the Detroit Lions hits you, and such is life. But one of the positions that you have targeted as well, like you said earlier on, was the running back position. Much talked about, obviously a history of trying to find that guy, you know, to replace Barry Sanders. They've yet to find the guy. In your 2-round mock draft that was featured on DetroitSportsPodcast.com, you got the Lions, number 51 pick, taking Kerryon Johnson, running back Auburn. Why'd you target him, and what does he bring to the table?
I think he's a slightly less explosive version of Sony Michel, who's already off the board in my mock draft. And I think he is a more reliable version of Ronald Jones II, who comes later. The Lions, this is going to be a pass-happy team. It's going to be a team that runs, that the running game is going to remain a complement of what they do. You're not going to take the ball out of Matthew Stafford's hands. Just like you don't take the ball out of Tom Brady's hands. When you've got a quarterback who's second in the NFL, in fourth quarter comebacks amongst active QBs. He's in the top 5 in the NFL the last 3 years in every meaningful category. And you have a league where if you breathe on a receiver past 5 yards, pass interference, you're not going to become the Jaguars. You're not putting the ball in the belly of Leonard Fournette 30 times. You're not going to do that, nor should you. But they need more of a running presence than they currently have. What I love about Kerryon Johnson, and there's a reason why I put him in that group with Ronald Jones and Sony Michel, the versatility. The idea of I can throw it to him out of the backfield. Right now, everybody knows when Theo Riddick comes in the game, it's a 90% chance it's a pass. A running back with the versatility of a Kerryon Johnson, of a Sony Michel, of a Ronald Jones, it's not an instant tell what you're going to do when they're in the game. And I think giving more of that, having more of a diversion there, more mystery there on offense is a big help. I love Nick Chubb. I think he's tremendous. But Nick Chubb is a guy that if you don't give him the ball 20 times, his value is severely diminished. I don't know. The Lions aren't looking for Nick Chubb. To me, they're looking for Alvin Kamara, if you get the analogy I'm making. They're looking for a guy that can run the ball 10 or 15 times, catch 5 or 6 passes in a game, and has just enough oomph that can carry it between the tackles, Although right now when you have LeGarrette Blount, you can use him as that hammer between the tackles late in games or in goal line situations. The Lions are looking for a running back, in my view, that amplifies what Matthew Stafford does well and doesn't take away from it, meaning that you don't feel as an offensive coordinator there's a tension between how many times I give the ball to Matt Stafford and how many times I got to give it to my running back so that I think he's effective. The Patriots have always stayed away from that so that their running backs complement the fact that they've got the GOAT at quarterback. The Lions need to mimic that. I don't want Matt Stafford throwing the ball any less. He's damn good at it. All right. What I want the Lions to do is run the ball better. Don't throw, not more, better. More is different than better. All right. And better is different than more. I want a running back in there that when he's in, the defense doesn't know what's coming. Is he coming between the tackles? Are they giving it to him out of the backfield? Is this a delayed draw? Is it a screen? Right now, based on who we put in at running back, opposing defenses knows what's coming. A guy like Kerryon Johnson or Sony Michel, if he were still there at that point, they add that mystery element that I think would help us.
Steve Deace has been kind enough to share his great football knowledge. You can obviously hear his passion. A longtime Lions fan, has been waiting for success like all of us. You can follow him on Twitter at Michigan Podcast, host of the Michigan Podcast. Great analysis regarding Michigan athletics each and every week here on the network. I'm going to leave you here with this to tie in your interests. What happens first? The Lions in the Super Bowl or Jim Harbaugh-led team in the college football playoff?
If you look at history, it's got to easily be Jim Harbaugh led team in a playoff. I mean, remember, I know last season, I can't even explain to your audience. Last season sucked the life out of me. It took I didn't enjoy watching it at all.
Oh, they heard.
2 years ago.
They heard every week.
2 years. 2 years ago, we were 2 plays away from being in the playoff. And people forget, even after losing those heartbreakers to Iowa and Ohio State, there was still a big debate down to the very last week about whether us or Washington was going to get in. All right. So I think Michigan getting to the playoff is a much more likely scenario than the Lions getting to the Super Bowl. But I will also say this. For the first time, I think there's a legitimate chance the Lions can get to a Super Bowl, and here's why. And the last time I felt this way, really since the prime of Barry Sanders' career, when you had Brett Perriman, Herman Moore, really, he was, Kevin Glover, Lomas Brown, he was surrounded by great talent too. But there's 2 things the Lions have right now that we've never had before in my lifetime, and probably the lifetime of anybody listening, because the last time we had a Pro Bowl quarterback was 1971. 1, we have a true elite franchise quarterback. 2, we have a competent front office that understands you've got to win championship teams in the NFL from the inside out. Now, whether they can identify the right players to do that. Everybody thinks that the Patriots hit in the draft. They miss in the draft a ton, John. It's just their margin for error with Tom Brady covers a multitude of sins. So I believe in the plan they're executing. Whether they can execute it or not remains to be seen. But the way that you build a Super Bowl team, get your franchise quarterback, build from the trenches from there. That's exactly what we're trying to do. So I think there's a real chance to get to a Super Bowl that probably hasn't been there since the zenith of Barry Sanders' career, which is going back almost a quarter century now. That doesn't mean they can make it happen, but I think they at least understand how it can happen.
Steve, great conversation. Can't wait to enjoy further debates, further talk regarding this version of the Detroit Lions. Always check out your great work with Michigan athletics. I hope for good times ahead for you, but except for those Saturdays where they play the Michigan State Spartans. Great talk. I always enjoy the conversation. You really are a great addition to the network. I listen every week. The YouTube videos are well produced. You're a credit to the field. You really do got passion for Michigan athletics. I enjoy the debates. Great talk. I look forward to doing it again in the future.
Really kind words, and back at you guys as well. Thanks for everything you do to help us get the word out about Michigan Podcast.
We'll talk soon, Steve. See you later.
Take care. God bless.
That was Steve Deace. Obviously loves himself Michigan athletics. Longtime Lions fan, even longer than the Doc. That wraps up this edition of the Motor City Sports Rant. I'm on vacation still, but Vito's in charge. He's got the reins of the network. I'm hoping he's doing a good job. I know he's listening to this as he's editing it for the Doc. I love it. I hope the conversation for Vito wasn't too tedious as he's editing this for one of the first times I enjoy it. Thank you, Steve, so much. Follow him on Twitter at Michigan Podcast. You can follow the network at Detroit Podcast. See everybody next time on another edition of the Motor City Sports Rant.
Okay, nice idiot. F you. Bye-bye.
Good day, sir. I said good day.
All right. Take care now. Bye-bye then.
Loser.